There are moments in life when everything doesn't shatter loudly. It simply grows quiet. Dreams stop calling your name. Hope feels heavier than despair. This is often when pain settles in, unnoticed, shaping our days from the inside. We carry it with discipline, hide it behind strength, and call it purpose. But what we're really holding on to is the past. This story is about that weight, about failure that lingers, about courage that arrives late, and about healing that begins the moment we choose to let go. In a small, unremarkable town there lived a father who believed forgiveness was weakness. He thought discipline built men, that silence was strength, and that love once broken could never return the same. This is his journey, and maybe, quietly, it is yours too. In the small town where mornings arrived quietly and left the same way, there lived a man who believed order could protect him from pain. His name was Elias. Every day began before sunrise, not because he enjoyed the morning, but because discipline had taught him that waking early meant control, and control, he believed, was the closest thing to safety life ever offered. Elias moved through his routines with precision, shoes aligned by the door, coffee brewed the same way every time, words measured, never wasted. To the world, he was dependable, a man of structure, a father who provided. But love in his house was quiet. It lived in actions, not words, in food on the table, in bills paid on time, in rules enforced without explanation. He had learned long ago that affection made people careless, that emotions blurred judgment, that attachment, if held too tightly, always found a way to break you. So Elias withheld, not out of cruelty, but fear. He watched his child from a distance, correcting mistakes quickly, praising rarely. He believed resilience was taught through silence, that strength was built when no one came to save you. And yet, beneath that certainty, something restless stirred. At night, when the house slept and the town exhaled, Elias sat alone with thoughts he never allowed during the day, questions without answers, moments he replayed but never revised. He remembered being young once, remembered wanting approval more than success, remembered how absence could hurt more than punishment. But he pushed those memories away. The past, he told himself, was a weakness. Reflection was indulgence. Looking back only slowed the journey forward. Still, there was a quiet ache he couldn't discipline away, because despite his structure, despite his strength, despite everything he believed, there was distance in his home. Not loud, not dramatic, just space. And space, left unattended, has a way of growing. Elias didn't know it yet, but this belief that withholding love made people stronger was already shaping his fate. Every rule he enforced without warmth. Every moment he chose restraint over connection. Every silence he mistook for stability. He wanted his child to be prepared for the world. He wanted to teach courage, discipline, purpose. But what he hadn't learned yet was that strength built without compassion eventually turns inward, and discipline without forgiveness becomes a prison. This was not the beginning of his fall. That would come later. This was something quieter, the moment a man convinced himself that love had to be rationed, and that withholding it was an act of protection. And so, the journey began. Not with a mistake, but with a belief. For a long time, Elias believed his life was proof that discipline worked. The years unfolded with steady rhythm, days stacked neatly on top of one another, like bricks in a wall built to keep chaos out. He worked without complaint, spoke little, expected much, and slowly the world rewarded him. The house grew warmer in winter, quieter in summer. The refrigerator stayed full. Bills were paid before they were due. Neighbors nodded with respect when they passed him on the street. This, Elias told himself, was success. Not joy, not laughter, but stability. He measured progress in practical ways: a promotion earned through reliability, a reputation built on consistency, a child who followed rules, kept schedules, and learned early how not to need too much. To Elias, this was love in its most responsible form. He believed motivation was born from pressure, that healing came from endurance, that strength was forged by learning to stand alone, even when others were near. So he stayed firm. When his child achieved something, Elias acknowledged it with a nod, not an embrace. Praise, he felt, softened people, made them dependent on validation instead of discipline. When mistakes were made, he corrected them quickly. Emotion had no place in correction. Clarity mattered more than comfort. And yet, something subtle was changing. The child grew quieter, not in obedience, but in expression. Questions were asked less often. Laughter became something shared with others, never fully at home. Elias noticed this but misread it. He saw independence where there was distance, maturity where there was withdrawal, strength where there was quiet longing. He told himself this was the goal, that he was preparing a strong human for a difficult world. But success, when measured only by survival, can hide what it costs. Evenings passed with everyone in the same room, yet alone. Conversations stayed practical. Feelings remained unnamed. Elias felt a faint discomfort in these moments, a sense that something important was being missed, but he ignored it. Discipline had taught him to push through discomfort, to stay the course, to trust systems over instincts. He believed that if he kept doing everything right, connection would come later. That love would naturally appear once life felt safe enough. What he didn't see was that love doesn't wait for permission. It either grows or it retreats. And while Elias was busy building a life that looked strong from the outside, a quiet gap was forming on the inside, one that success could not fill, one that discipline could not repair. This was the rise. The part of the story where everything seemed stable, but beneath the order, beneath the routine, beneath the calm, a flaw was waiting, not to destroy him loudly, but to slowly pull apart the very thing he believed he was protecting. The day everything broke did not announce itself. There was no storm, no raised voices echoing through the house, no moment dramatic enough to mark on a calendar. It arrived quietly, like most irreversible things do. It began with a mistake, not a small one, not the kind that fades with time, but the kind born from fear, pressure, and the desperate need to be seen. When Elias discovered it, his first response was not anger. It was disbelief. He stood there, holding the weight of it in his hands, reading and rereading the truth as if repetition might change it. This was not how things were supposed to unfold. This was not what discipline produced. His chest tightened. Control, his greatest ally, slipped through his fingers. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. Words came out measured, precise, and unforgiving. There was no shouting, no accusations thrown wildly, just disappointment. And disappointment, when delivered without warmth, cuts deeper than rage. He spoke of consequences, of responsibility, of how choices shape the rest of your life. He did not speak of fear. He did not speak of love. He did not ask why. In that moment, Elias believed he was teaching a lesson, but what his child heard was something else entirely. They heard that failure erased worth, that mistakes outweighed years of effort, that love was conditional, earned, not given. The space between them widened. Silence followed. Days passed without real conversation. Meals were eaten separately. Doors closed gently but firmly. Elias told himself this distance was necessary, that pain now would prevent pain later, that discipline required separation. Then came the moment he didn't expect. A bag by the door, a note, short and carefully written. No blame, no anger, just absence. Elias stood in the quiet that followed, staring at what was left behind. A room that still smelled familiar, a chair that would no longer be used, a routine suddenly missing its purpose. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't categorize. Not anger, not regret, at least not yet. It was failure. The kind that doesn't break things around you, only the things inside. He had done everything right, followed every rule he believed in, built a life on discipline and control, and still, something had slipped away. That night, Elias sat alone in the dark, the house unusually loud in its emptiness. He replayed the conversation over and over, searching for a different outcome. But the words were already spoken, and silence, once chosen, has a way of staying. This was the fall. Not because he lost control, but because he realized too late that control was never the same as connection. In the weeks that followed, Elias lived in two timelines at once. One was the present, where morning still came, coffee still brewed, and the town continued as if nothing had changed, where people greeted him the same way, unaware that something essential was missing from his life. The other lived entirely in his mind. It replayed that final conversation endlessly, each pause, each carefully chosen word, each moment where he could have spoken differently, but didn't. Elias told himself he was right. That discipline demanded distance, that consequences were necessary. Forgiveness, he believed, would only weaken the lesson. So he clung to the past, not because it comforted him, but because letting go felt like admitting failure. He kept the room untouched, the bed made, the door closed, but never locked, as if preservation could invite return. Every object became evidence, proof that the bond still existed somewhere, even if broken. He rehearsed speeches he would give if they came back, firm, logical explanations, justifications wrapped in calm certainty. He told himself that when enough time passed, things would make sense again. That distance would correct what emotion had complicated. But time, instead of healing, only sharpened the ache. At night, the house pressed in on him. The silence grew heavier than any argument ever had. Elias avoided places that reminded him too much, avoided neighbors who asked questions, avoided mirrors that reflected a man he didn't recognize. He refused to say the words he feared most. I was wrong, because saying them would mean something deeper. That strength alone wasn't enough. That discipline could fail. That love, once withheld, might not wait patiently forever. So he stayed frozen, caught between who he believed he was and who the moment demanded him to become. This denial did not look dramatic. It looked functional. He went to work, paid his bills, followed routines with even greater precision than before. But inside, everything stalled. Healing requires movement, and Elias chose stillness instead. He thought holding on meant loyalty, that refusing to forgive was a form of moral consistency. What he didn't see was that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is releasing the need to punish the past. And until Elias understood that, every day became a repetition. The same thoughts, the same silence, the same unresolved ending. He was no longer protecting himself. He was preserving the wound, and wounds kept alive long enough begin to shape the soul. Over time, the house stopped feeling like a home. It became a structure. Four walls holding routine, not meaning. Silence replaced conversation so completely that Elias no longer noticed it arriving. This was not grief as the world imagined it. There were no tears, no dramatic breakdowns, no visible signs of collapse, just absence. Elias woke up, worked, returned, and repeated. Discipline carried him forward even when purpose did not. Meals were smaller, lights stayed off longer, rooms remained unused. He sat in the evening staring at nothing in particular, listening to the faint sounds of the town settling into night. Cars passing, distant laughter, life continuing elsewhere. Inside him, something hollow echoed. He had believed strength meant endurance, that healing was simply surviving long enough for pain to dull. But pain, when ignored, doesn't fade. It spreads. The routines that once gave him control now felt meaningless. Order without connection became weight. He stopped correcting small things around the house, stopped caring if objects were out of place. This scared him more than anger ever could, because discipline had been his identity. And now even that felt fragile. Some nights Elias sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, breathing slow, as if waiting for instructions that never came. He tried to remember the last time he felt genuinely needed, not relied upon, not respected, needed. The answer never arrived. In this emptiness, he began to understand something uncomfortable. That punishment hadn't taught anyone a lesson. That silence hadn't created strength. That withholding love had not protected him from loss. It had only delayed the moment he would have to face it alone. This was the lowest point, not because of despair, but because of numbness. When a man feels nothing, there is no resistance left, no distraction, no belief strong enough to shield him. Elias stood at the edge of change without realizing it. The pain had done its work. The denial was exhausted. The emptiness had cleared the ground. All that remained was a question he could no longer avoid. What if forgiveness was not about the other person at all? What if it was the only way forward? For him? The silence didn't answer. But for the first time since everything broke, Elias didn't push the question away. He let it stay. And in that stillness, something small but alive began to stir. The interruption did not come in the form Elias expected. There was no speech, no confrontation, no moment heavy with meaning. It arrived on an ordinary afternoon, disguised as nothing important at all. Elias had stopped by a small park on the edge of town, a place he rarely visited. Not because he disliked it, but because it reminded him of a time when life felt shared. He sat on a bench, hands resting on his knees, watching the slow rhythm of the world move past him. That's when he noticed the old man. He came every day at the same hour, feeding birds with careful patience. He spoke softly to them, not as pets, but as companions. Elias watched in silence. The old man never rushed, never scolded the birds for fighting over crumbs. He simply waited. After a while, one bird returned, then another. Eventually, the bench was surrounded. The old man glanced at Elias and smiled, not out of politeness, but recognition. "Funny thing about trust," he said gently. "You can't demand it. You can only make space for it." Elias didn't respond, but the words stayed. Days passed, and Elias found himself returning to the park, sitting, watching. The old man was always there. One afternoon, Elias asked, "Don't they ever disappoint you?" The old man laughed softly. "Every day," he said. "But that's not the point." He brushed crumbs from his coat. "They come back because I don't punish them for being hungry." The simplicity unsettled Elias. No lecture, no blame, just observation. That night, Elias lay awake replaying the scene. He thought about discipline, about lessons, about how often he had expected emotional perfection from someone still learning how to be human. For the first time, forgiveness did not feel like surrender. It felt like understanding. The old man never spoke of mistakes as failures, only as part of the journey. And Elias realized something quietly devastating. He had confused authority with love, control with safety, distance with strength. The interruption was gentle, but irreversible. A crack had formed in the story Elias told himself about who he was and what love required. He didn't change overnight, but something shifted. For the first time since everything fell apart, Elias considered that healing might begin not with discipline, but with mercy. And mercy, unlike control, could not be enforced. It had to be chosen. Change did not arrive as a grand decision. There was no moment where Elias stood up and declared a new way of being. No promise made aloud, no dramatic turning point. It came quietly, the way real transformation often does, through small, almost invisible choices. Elias began by listening more, not to others, but to himself. He noticed how tightly he held his thoughts, how quickly he corrected emotions before they fully formed, how often he confused restraint with strength. One evening, he opened the door to the unused room. Dust hung in the air, untouched and patient. The bed was still made the way he had left it, frozen in time. For the first time, Elias did not preserve the room. He changed the sheets, opened the window, let fresh air disturb what he had tried to keep unchanged. It felt like betrayal at first, as if letting the room breathe meant letting go of the person who once filled it. But it didn't. It simply acknowledged reality. Forgiveness, Elias realized, was not an erasure of the past. It was the release of resistance to what already was. He began writing letters he never sent, not to justify himself, but to understand. He wrote about fear, about expectations, about the weight of responsibility he never knew how to share. Some nights he stopped mid-sentence, overwhelmed by the realization that his discipline had been built on avoidance. Avoidance of vulnerability, avoidance of apology, avoidance of the simple words he never learned to say. "I'm sorry. I was afraid. I didn't know how to love better." He practiced saying them aloud, to empty rooms, to passing reflections, to the silence that once terrified him. Slowly, the house changed. Not in structure, but in feeling. Elias allowed himself to rest without guilt, to sit without correcting, to feel sadness without rushing it away. Healing, he discovered, required patience. The discipline he once used to suppress emotion was now redirected toward consistency, showing up for himself, choosing humility daily, letting go again and again. Some days were heavier than others. Forgiveness is not a single act, it is a practice. And each time Elias loosened his grip on the past, something unexpected happened. The weight lessened, not because the pain disappeared, but because it was no longer being carried alone. He understood now. Rebirth doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means becoming honest about who you've always been. And for the first time, Elias felt the faint presence of peace. Not the loud kind. The kind that arrives softly when resistance finally ends. Growth, Elias learned, does not erase old habits. It simply makes them visible. Just when life began to feel lighter, when peace settled into his routines like a familiar breath, the past returned, testing everything he thought he had learned. It happened during moments of stress, a long day at work, a careless remark from a stranger, a memory triggered without warning. The old instinct rose quickly: withdraw, correct, control. There were evenings when Elias felt the familiar urge to retreat into silence, to tighten his schedule, to reassert order as a way of calming himself. He recognized the pattern now. Discipline had once been armor, and armor, when worn too long, becomes a cage. One afternoon he caught himself drafting another unsent letter, this time full of explanations and justifications, not apologies. He stopped. Growth, he realized, wasn't about perfection. It was about noticing the moment before the old self took over. So he chose differently. Instead of withdrawing, he stayed present. Instead of defending, he listened. Instead of controlling the narrative, he allowed uncertainty to exist. This was harder than discipline had ever been. Consistency demanded courage. There were setbacks. Days when guilt returned uninvited. Nights when regret resurfaced, heavy and sharp. But Elias no longer ran from them. He sat with discomfort the way the old man sat with the birds, patient, unpunishing, allowing. The past did not disappear, it softened. Each time Elias resisted the urge to retreat, strength grew, not in force, but in steadiness. This was the new struggle. Not surviving pain, but staying open in its presence. Not proving resilience, but practicing compassion. He understood now that discipline was never the enemy. It simply needed a new purpose. Not to suppress feeling, but to support healing. Each day became an act of quiet courage. Each choice, a small reaffirmation. He was no longer defined by what he withheld, but by what he was willing to offer, even when afraid. And though the journey was unfinished, Elias felt something unfamiliar and steady within him: trust, not in outcomes, not in people, but in his ability to respond with grace. The change did not announce itself. No moment arrived where Elias suddenly felt complete, or certain, or healed in the way stories often promise. Instead, life simply began to feel balanced. Morning still came early. Discipline still guided his days, but it no longer ruled them. Elias moved with less urgency now. He listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke, his words carried warmth instead of weight. Love, he discovered, did not require authority to survive. It required presence. There were small moments, almost unnoticeable, that marked this transformation. He began greeting neighbors with genuine curiosity, holding doors open not out of habit but awareness, allowing conversations to wander without steering them back to safety. Purpose shifted too. It was no longer about control or legacy. It was about alignment, living in a way that left room for others to exist fully, mistakes included. And then, one ordinary afternoon, life offered him a quiet gift, a message, not dramatic, not heavy with emotion, just a few simple lines, an update, a shared memory, a question at the end. Elias sat with the message for a long time before responding, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to answer as the man he had become, not the one he used to be. He didn't explain, didn't justify, didn't correct. He replied with honesty, with apology, with openness, with patience. Whatever came next, he knew one thing. Love was no longer something he rationed. It was something he practiced. Peace followed. Not because everything was resolved, but because resistance had ended. Elias understood now that forgiveness was not a single bridge you crossed once. It was a way of walking, a posture of the heart. And whether reconciliation unfolded slowly or not at all, he was no longer trapped in the past. He had learned how to love without fear, to lead without control, to remain open without losing himself. This was the new dawn. Not bright, not loud, just steady. And for the first time in a long while, Elias felt ready, not for perfection, but for connection. There is a quiet truth most of us learn too late. That strength is not proven by how much we can endure, but by how willing we are to soften. Elias believed discipline would protect him. That control would keep love intact, that withholding emotion was a form of wisdom. But life taught him something gentler, that forgiveness is not weakness, it is courage without armor. You see, failure is not the moment everything breaks. Failure is the moment we refuse to grow from what broke us. Elias learned that healing begins when we stop punishing the past, when we release the need to be right, when we accept that love, to survive, must be allowed to breathe. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pride, understanding over judgment, connection over control. There are moments in your own life, perhaps right now, where silence feels safer than honesty, where discipline has become a shield, where strength looks like distance. But real strength asks something different. It asks you to stay present when it would be easier to withdraw, to listen when correction feels more familiar, to forgive, not because others deserve it, but because you do. Forgiveness does not rewrite the past, it frees the future. Purpose is not found in perfection. It is found in alignment between who you are and how you love. And rebirth is never dramatic. It happens quietly, the moment you choose not to carry the weight anymore. If this story found you at a time of struggle, remember this: you are not late, you are not broken beyond repair, and you are not weak for wanting peace. The journey continues, not when everything is fixed, but when you decide to move forward with courage and compassion. And if this story resonated with you, if it reflected a part of your own path, carry it forward. Share it with someone who needs healing. Stay for the journey and allow yourself the strength of letting go. Because the most powerful transformation is the one that leads you back to yourself.